there's going to be a couple topics we'll see today. Right. The first topic we'll see is a foundation on building strings. So we've seen like small strings, a way to represent text, but we're going to build upon that. Do something called formatted strings, which you can think of as a foundation for representing HTML. Right? For folks who haven't heard about HTML, this is kind of like how websites are built. For folks in person, I have a book on this right here, HTML. So uh, we're gonna do something called formatted strings today, which will help us understand how to build HTML in a more modular fashion. And it's gonna be some really cool stuff. I think about halfway through the class, we're gonna see the second lesson, right? Some HTML. Okay, but let's do the foundation stuff first. So this is going to be lesson 8 on quotes and formatting. Okay, so I'm going to load up this quotes and formatting along with the lab LO8. So there we go. We're going to kind of jump back and forth, right? We're going to do the first half of the lesson and then jump into the first half of this lab. So let's do that. Okay, lesson 8. This is quotes and formatting, right? This is a way of formatting strings that will help us understand the foundation for building more complicated strings. Okay. There are actually kind of two major parts in this lesson, right? The first major part is kind of something called formatted strings, right? F string. Right? So F string is a way of modifying a string, right? So we'll see that in a bit. And then the second major part of this lesson is this format function, right? Which is another way of doing the same exact job. In programming, we'll see that there are multiple ways on solving a problem, right? Multiple ways on kind of representing a solution. So the first way, we're going to talk about F strings. And then the second way, I think we're going to kind of breeze over this, the second part. It's not too important yet, but the biggest takeaway from this lecture today will be the F string. So yeah, let's jump into it. All right, quotes in formatting. We saw in the first week how to kind of use single quotes and double quotes. Right, they're both the same in this scenario because we're not using any apostrophes or double quotes within it. Right, you can use triple quotes too. But this is one of the first ones that we'll see later. Right, triple quotes actually allow us to represent multi-line strings. Right, we'll see this in a bit. Right, multi-line string is a way of representing text on multiple lines. And once again, the biggest topic for today is something called F strings, right? Formatted strings. This is where we prefix a string with a F, and we can do some special stuff inside of the string, right? So there's this is called variable interpolation, meaning that it'll dump the value of this variable here, right? So name that's highlighted, this is a variable that's defined somewhere in a program, right? So we'll talk about this in a bit. Okay. Once again, in the very beginning of the class, we talked about single quotes, right? A way of representing text. So in this case, let's see if this works. Right? If I were to print this right here, let me just make another cell. Okay, so I just press this plus button here, and I'm just gonna print this right here. Let's see what happens. Right? We're attempting to print this sentence right here, right? But when I press play, it says unterminated string literal. Isn't that kind of weird? Well, why is it an unterminated string literal? How do we fix this? There's a few different ways we can fix this, but do people kind of see what's going on here? Yeah, what's going on? Why is it unterminated string literal? Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's one way. We could use double quotes instead because of this apostrophe in the middle. Right, so a way of interpreting this right here, unterminated, unterminated string literal means that it's expecting another pair. Right? In this case, the Python kernel is interpreting this right here. I just highlighted it. Right? It's interpreting this as one single string, but then the second piece, it doesn't know what it is. Right? So it sees it like this right here. It says, hey, I see one string here, but then this one, I don't know what this is. Right? So unterminated string literal expects there to be pairs. So one way we could fix this is with using double quotes. Right? And once we print that, it should print it properly, which works because there's no double quotes inside of it. All right, so I hope people find that useful. That's one way. Okay. Do another one. I'm going to add another cell and kind of copy this. Add a cell and print this. Okay, let's see what happens when we print this multi-line string. So this is going to work if I print it like this right here. Right, so I just put it all on one single line, and when we press play, it's going to print it all out right here. Right, but the second I represent the string on multiple lines like this right here, right, all I did was press enter in between, and press play. It says unterminated string literal. Right, so there's a couple ways of fixing this. The way we're going to see right now is called representing multi-line strings. We can represent multi-line strings with triple quotes, right? Meaning when we use triple quotes on the beginning and the end, right, it should tell Python that this is one single string, right, on multiple lines. So then we'll press play, and yeah, that should work. In my opinion, it's probably easier to read if we put it out like this right here. Put this out here, and then like this. I think this is easier to read. Print, and then the beginning of multi-line string, end of it, and then press play. Yeah, same thing. By the way, this is going to be very useful, right? Multi-line strings will be useful when we're building HTML. Right? We haven't talked about HTML yet, but it's pretty much a way of designing websites. Okay. All right. Once again, this is just a poem, right? A multi-line string. So we can just print it out here because we're using triple quotes. So yeah, that should work the same way. I think triple single quotes would work as well. I don't think it matters here. So triple single quotes, yeah, does the same exact thing. Okay. People cool with this so far? Just some multi-line strings? Okay. All right. All right, so this is probably the most important thing we'll learn this week. This is going to help us with the next lesson and also the next project. I'm going to release the next project in just a bit. It's pretty much the weather assignment again, but it's going to look a lot nicer. I will release that on probably Wednesday. So yeah, the F string is another way of saying formatted string. Right, this is a one of the cool features in Python. So if we were to like put a plain string here, like hello space world, right? This evaluates to this string right here, right? But what if we wanted to put a variable inside of here, right? Like what if we wanted to represent the value of some variable in here? Let me just here. Let me put this in a print statement. Right? Like what if I declared some variable? I'm just going to say something is equal to world. All right, and we want to put the value of this variable in here, right? If I say like something, right, hello something, right? We're trying to get this down here. Right? It might seem kind of weird why we're doing this, but this is useful because variables can change, and this will be useful for the next assignment too. All right, so I'll try to press play, but it says hello something. All right, we want the value. We want this to evaluate to world. So a feature in Python, we can use, we can prefix this string with an F. meaning that it'll treat this as a formatted string. Right? It's still going to do the same exact thing when I press play, right? But an f string allows us to do something called variable interpolation, meaning that it'll put the value of some variable here. We just need to enclose this variable in curly braces. Whoops. So curly braces right here. So once we enclose it in curly braces and press play, it'll successfully dump the result of this into here. So yeah, this is called variable interpolation, right? We're formatting a string and dumping the value of this here. A cool thing we can do within these curly braces, right? We can treat this variable as some expression, right? So do folks remember what happens if I were to multiply this by 10? Yeah, it should, right? Something times 10, it's just world 10 times. So if I press play, right, it's going to be hello something right here. Right, so that's a really cool thing we can do here. You don't have to use a formatted string to do this, but yeah, as we'll see in programming, there are tons of ways on approaching stuff. Okay, and once again, what happens if we forget the F, right? If I don't put an F here, so I'm just going to delete the F. I don't do this. All right, so if I delete the F, it's going to literally treat everything in here as characters. All right, so then it's just going to say hello something times 10. So that I'll put as an F. This way we can properly interpolate the stuff inside of these curly braces. There's some really cool stuff we can do. All right. Okay, going down a bit. As we said, there is multiple ways on representing stuff. So this, I'll let folks try this out yourself. But in the first week, we kind of saw how to represent a string, right? So in the very first week, we did something like this, where word is equal to program. And if we were to print this out, right, there's multiple ways on doing it. Right, we can use commas or we can use plus signs. Right, these are the same thing. It's the same thing, but we're not using f strings yet. Right, so once again, just to reiterate that it is the same. Right, you can just use a plus sign right here. Right, you use a plus sign here. Right, same thing. And then yeah, it's the same thing except there's going to be no spaces here. Right, there's no spaces because we didn't put spaces in between. Right, but I'm going to revert it back to commas. With the commas, the print statement will automatically space separate these inputs. Okay, yeah, same thing. But if we were to do this in an f string, right? So I'm just gonna kind of do this manually. I'm just gonna type it out. Right, another way we can print this two pieces out is, just define the variable as the same thing, and then I'm just gonna represent everything as an f string. Right, so print some f string. Right, in this case, it's gonna be I do not word you accept because I word you. Right, so I'm just going to press play here. Right, all we did was copy this statement down, but I'm using formatted string instead. Okay, so I'm just going to press play, make sure it works. Right, it's a good programming practice to test frequently. Okay, it looks like our first print statement worked. So we can move on to the next one. Right, print another f string. Right, I go from word ing to not a word ing you. Again, press play. All right, cool, same thing. So yeah, we just saw two different ways of doing the same exact thing. The F string is really convenient, right? This is a very superior feature of Python. I prefer the second block of code. It's arguably more readable. Okay. All right. Let's jump into the lab. I think we should be able to do part 1 and part 2 of the lab. So let me just switch over to the lab on formatting. Let me check. Let me just skim this real quick. So part 1 is on quotes. Part 2 is on the F string. Okay, and then part 3 we don't know yet. All right, I think we can actually get part 1 and part 2 done. All right, part 1 is just asking us to use different types of quotes, double, single, and triple quotes to represent multi-line strings. Right, and then part 2 is asking us to use F strings. I'll help folks get started on this second part actually, because this is going to be a tiny bit tricky. But basically in the second part, there is a cell that predefines some variables for us. The next problems will ask us to use the values of these variables to print. So make sure we run this cell. Right, I'll run this cell just to help folks get started on part 2. So number 1 asks us to use an F string to print this line right here. All right, but so here let's just print it. Right, so, well, we do want to substitute these x's with the value of these numbers. All right, so I'll help folks get started. So I'll just do a print, right, and then I'll do an F string here, right, and then paste this into here. Right, so there we go. I'll print it, and we are almost done with number 1 in part 2. But the goal of this is to interpolate the values of variables into these x's. Right, so in this x, right, a is equal to the value of a, so we need to put a in here within these curly braces, and the same with b, right, b within the curly braces, and then c within the curly braces, and then press play, and it should interpolate it properly. Yeah, this is in the second part of the lab. So yeah, I just wanted to give folks a head start on this because the next ones will ask you to kind of do some math on it. All right, so you can do math within the curly braces. So yeah, go ahead and give it a shot. We'll give it like, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes. So let's give it 15 minutes. Part 2 is going to be a tiny bit tricky, but don't worry if folks can't get it done. We'll get it done together. All right, but do please try it out yourself. Okay, so part 1 and part 2. All right, no need to do number 3 because we didn't even cover the format function yet. Okay, let's go 15-minute timer. And yeah, feel free to raise your hand or say something in the Zoom chat. Be happy to help. Okay, welcome back from intermission, everyone. Here, let's get this done together, and then we're gonna probably finish up the rest of lesson 8, and then get a sneak peek into the HTML lesson. So yeah, let's finish up. Part 1 asks us to use quotes. It wants us to print this right here. Right, this does have a single quote within it, so it would probably be a good idea to use double quotes to enclose it. Right, this way we can represent the single quote within it. Okay, and then next, this is the opposite. Right, that this is we want to print this whole thing, but there are double quotes in it, so it might be useful to enclose the whole thing in single quotes. And so hopefully people got that. And then this one's a tiny bit trickier, triple quotes. Right, it says use only one print statement to print this whole thing out. Right, just one. Right, you can do this in 2, but for purposes of learning multi-line strings, right, we can represent it in a triple quote. Right, so I'm just going to start a triple quote right here, meaning that we can represent these 2 lines. Right, there we go. So that's our representation of a string. Right, if we play it, the result won't look as nice, but this is the representation of this string here. Right, we just have to print it. Right, so I'll go ahead and print it, and then it should be good now. Right, so multi-line strings. Okay, so that was part one. Part two asks us to apply some f strings, some formatted strings. There are a couple examples here, and in particular, we want to use these three predefined variables. So make sure you run this cell, otherwise your future ones might get an error. So we did this first part together as a sneak peek, right? We did an f string that just printed this out right here. Right, but let's go ahead and do some math with it. Right, this next part asks us to print this right here. Right, so you know what? Let's just represent this in an f string real quick. So f, and then whoops, wrong one. Copy and then paste. Right. Actually, I don't really want to promote copy and pasting. I feel like some people might need to practice typing. So maybe type it out manually. Equals something. Right. Equals the value of the product. Right. So in this case, we need to represent the value of the product in these curly braces. Right. A times B times C. That should properly interpolate it. Right. So the value of this string will be this right here, right, which looks good. Now we just got to print it out. Okay, there we go. Cool. Okay. So that was number two. Folks may be wondering, what's this .0000007 in the end? Don't worry about it too much. But pretty much in short, this is an approximate answer. Computers aren't that good at floating point arithmetic because they can't represent precise decimals in binary. So floating point arithmetic, there's usually some round off error. So yeah, don't worry about this too much. If you take CS24, which is computer architecture, you kind of see why this happens. Okay, finally, we want to combine multi-line strings with an f string. Right, so let's print these three lines out. Right, so maybe we should probably represent this as a multi-line f string. Right, so there we go, multi-line f string. The first statement here will be, you know, a minus b is equal to the result of those. Right, so a minus b, and then next is the same thing, a minus c, and then b minus c. Okay, there we go. So, you know, we run it. It's not going to show up nicely because this is just the representation. Right, but if we print that representation, it should look good now. Okay, cool. People cool with this so far? Part one, part two. Okay. This one we don't know how to do yet. Part three asks us to repeat everything above, but a different way. So I think we're gonna kind of breeze over this. This is not too important yet. Right? There's a format function that lets us do the same exact thing. But I think I'm gonna breeze over it and let folks kind of fill in the gaps themselves. And we'll go over it next time. I'm not sure when, but it's not too important yet. I just want to make sure folks are okay with, you know, formatted strings, just the f string. This is the most important thing we'll learn this week. So yeah, let's make sure we're comfortable with that. Okay. So this, going back to the lesson, let's go down to formatting here. This is the second half of the lesson. We're going to see another way of kind of building complex strings. Okay. There are some string methods that we have seen a while ago. You might have remembered that I Googled something called string methods in Python and looked at the primary documentation. Our primary documentation is right here, the python.org. So this is very dense. Basically, there are lots of things we can do with strings, right? Like we can do a string.capitalize. Right here, let's actually try that right now. if folks have a terminal, um, you don't need a terminal, but if you do have a Python terminal, then you can pretty much type in something like some string, right? Like let me just say hello, right? And then I'm just going to use this dot capitalize function, right? So hello dot capitalize, right? This gives us, it evaluates to another string where the first one is capital. Right? So we're just using a, oh, you can do this in your Jupyter notebook too. Right? I'm just doing it in the terminal because it's a lot faster and I think cleaner in my opinion. So let's see, terminal, let's try a different string method, right? Like I think another string method that we did was, there are lots of them. Oh, I think we did string.replace. This was like on week 2. So pretty much if we have a string like hello world, right, but then use a string method called replace, right, we can give it 2 arguments, right? The first, I'm just going to say replace hello with hi, right? So this should give us hi world, right? Because we're using a string function and telling the function to replace hello with hi, right? So it evaluates to hi world. And once again, we're just getting exposed to a couple different ones, a couple different string methods. Right? The next string method we'll see in this lesson is something called format. Right? This is very similar to an f string. It's right here. Right? str.format. Right? So just kind of a sneak peek into this. We can represent a string, right? So I'm just going to say something like hello, and then say format, right? Let's say we have some curly braces here, right? So let's put some curly braces. In this case, it's kind of like f strings where we're expecting something to be in here, right? I'm not going to put anything in here yet, but the format function can help substitute things into it, right? So hello.format, and let me just put world in here, right? This is going to evaluate to hello world, right? This is the same as an f string that says hello. Give me 1 second. Right? It's the same as an f string where you say hello and then something in here, right? But you can assume that something would be world. Right? So 2 different ways of doing something. Right? Let's go ahead and jump into the lesson though. This is just a sneak peek. Right? We're talking about string methods. So there's a function, a string function called .format. Right? This allows us to fill in holes. So you can kind of assume there's a string right here, right? So this is a string with a hole. Right? A hole is kind of like with these curly braces, we're expecting something to be substituted in it. So if we use the .format function, it'll automatically fill in the holes with whatever arguments we provided. Right? Once again, just another way of doing the f string. But this is just a little more complicated way, in my opinion. Right, so we saw this in the terminal earlier. If we represent hello and then something dot format, right? So this is not an f string, right? So I'm just going to put world here, right? This will evaluate to another string, right? Evaluates to hello world, right? And once again, this is the same thing as earlier. Like if we say something is equal to world, right? This is going to be the same thing, but instead of here, let's put something. And let me just print it out. Right? Hello world. All right. So just to kind of repeat, right? Earlier we did f strings, right? So another way is just saying something is equal to world, and then instead of using the format function, we can just use an f string, right? Hello something. So let's go print it out. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Exact, same exact stuff. In my opinion, this second one is cleaner because it's easier to read. Right? If people see how this F string is a little easier to read, but this first method is a little harder because we have to put a empty hole and then we have to say dot format. No, this is a little more cumbersome. I prefer this one. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. First one is not an F string. Yeah. Exactly. Oh, good question. This first one, this method was backported from old versions of Python. Yeah, this F string actually came out recently. I think the F string functionality came out in Python 3. But if you're working with older versions of Python, you have to use a dot format. Yeah, yeah, same thing. Okay. Yeah. Oh, good question. Does the triple quotes work with this right here? Yeah, it should. It should work because as long as it's a string. Right, so if we were to do a triple quote string right here, right, hello, let me just make it easier to read. So boom, and then maybe boom dot format. Right, let's say, how are you? Uh, so let's test it. Right, same thing. So we could have a multi-line string and then dot format. Right. Hope that makes sense. And just kind of a sneak peek in the future. Right. This is kind of going ahead. You can format multiple things. Right. Like you could say name is equal to Andrew, and then maybe here I could say how are you? Another hole. Right. So now this string has two holes, meaning that the format function should have two inputs. So I'll put name here. I should say, hello world, how are you, Andrew? Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, any other questions about this format function so far? Okay, okay. Let's move on. Let's see. Okay, so the next pieces, the rest of this lesson is really just repeating itself, but getting fancier and fancier. Right, like, so this evaluates to a string, right? Hello.format world, right? This evaluates to a string, meaning that we can just store it into some phrase, right? Phrase. So phrase will become hello world. Right? So phrase is a new string, and we can just print it out, right? Print phrase. Right? Same thing. All we're doing is storing the result of this function. Right? This function outputs another string. Okay. I think in like 5 more assignments, we'll use the format function. Right? In particular, we're going to be doing something called Mad Libs. Right? Has anyone here ever played Mad Libs? Yeah. So Mad Libs is a game where you kind of ask someone to fill in the blanks. Like pretty much, there's a story with blanks, and you're asking a friend, "Hey, name a verb, or name a noun, or say an adjective." Right? And then that friend will supply those words, which will fill in the blanks. So, in probably 5 more assignments, we'll apply this. Right? So, think of this as a story, right? Like, let's say story template. Right? For those who have played Mad Libs, let's say the story is something like, "Hello, my name is," and then some hole. Right? So then later on, we can use the story template and fill in the blanks. Right? In this case, we could say, you could ask a friend like, hey, say a name. In this case, I'll just put like Andrew right here. Right, so this is like a small version of Mad Libs. Right? We're starting with a story with blanks, and then we're filling in the blanks with this format function. So we're going to see this later on. Okay. Hold up, let me just go down a bit. Just going to skim this. Okay. Let's do a couple more things and we'll be done with this lesson. And then we'll move on to some HTML. Right, we're just going to kind of breeze over this. A template, right, can have multiple holes. We saw a sneak peek into this over here. Right, over here, we put 2 holes and then put 2 inputs within the format function. Right, so you can put 2, you can put 3, as many as you want, as long as the number kind of matches how many inputs are in this format function. So yeah, we can do that same exact thing. Like let's say the story template has 2 holes. Right, so in this case, the template has 2 holes. My name is blank, and my favorite color is blank. Right, so pretend it's Mad Libs. Like ask your friend, hey, say a name, and then they say a name, and ask them, hey, say a color. Right, so then after they say it, you can just finish the story by filling in the holes with whatever they said. Right, so in this case, I'm just going to say Andrew, and my favorite color is green. Template.format, and it should just print this right here. Okay, so that's pretty much all we need to cover on format. I don't really want to overload people with too many ways of doing one single thing. So I think I'm just going to stop right here. If folks are curious, you can go down the rest of this and kind of read it and play around with this function. But you should have enough to do this part right here now, right? Part 3. I'm going to let folks do this at home. We're not going to do this in class. But yeah, feel free to do this at home. It's really repeating part 2, right? All of these math stuff, right? But using the format function instead. Right, so once again, this is not too important, but in about 5 more assignments, we will be using the format function, right? In an assignment called Mad Libs. So yeah, for now, just make sure you're comfortable with F strings. F strings right here. Yeah, good question. Will F string come up more in the format? In my opinion, yeah. Just because it's more readable. It's a really good feature of the newest Python. Yeah, it's just so much cleaner. Our version of Python is Python 3 point something. Yeah. By the way, if folks are into using the terminal, are any folks here in like Unix programming in Unix or Linux? Oh, okay. So yeah, if folks are comfortable with that, you can actually load up a terminal in this environment. Just press this plus button, and then there is a console called the, or actually you could load up this plain terminal. So this plain terminal is going to be something called bash, right? And so bash will allow you to do some commands that will browse through a lot of things, right? So you don't have to know this for this class, right? But if you took a Linux class, you might know like ls, which means list. You might know pwd, which is print working directory, right? You might know how to do cd space dot dot, and then cd means change directory, right? You can do ls cd week 3 weather. Right, so I'm just kind of playing around. But in particular, I just wanted to bring up a Python terminal. Right, if you type in Python in the bash terminal, it'll bring up a something called a REPL. And yeah, this is kind of like what I was playing around with earlier. I was kind of just bringing up a Python terminal. Right? This is called a REPL, where you can do like a bunch of small one-liner calculations. Right? Like hello times 3, that gives you hello, hello, hello. Right? This is called a REPL, REPL, which stands for read, evaluate, print, and loop. Okay. So yeah, that's if folks are interested in this. I'm gonna exit this terminal though. Okay. So yeah, we are done with lesson 8. I'm gonna let folks do this at home the rest of the lab. Okay, any questions on lesson 8 so far? Mhm. Yeah, yeah. If anything is not too important yet, this advanced formatting, right? I'm not going to cover advanced formatting. This is kind of like an optional thing. So yeah, you actually don't need to know it. No, 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 you don't need to. Yeah, yeah, you don't need to know advanced formatting for to do the next material. And same with the byte strings and all of that. So someone earlier mentioned, do we need to do byte strings? No, 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 you don't. This is just these last two ones are just optional stuff. Right? We do learn it, but it's going to be optional. So I'm just going to kind of skip over it. Yeah, yeah. These are just little small things that kind of require deep. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Okay. So yeah, we just finished this part right here. Right. In week 4, we are doing strings and printing, which is a foundation for building HTML strings. Right, so we should probably talk about what HTML is. We're going to do a sneak peek into the next lesson and probably end pretty early. So let's do a sneak peek, and then on Wednesday we'll finish up HTML. Okay, so I'm going to quit all of this. Make sure you save it too. So save. I'm going to quit it. Let's load up a lesson on HTML. All right, lesson 9, our second one of today. Lesson number 9, Intro to HTML. Okay. All right. I'm just waiting for people to load it up. All right, let's talk about HTML. Some of the folks might have heard this from a while ago. It might be one of the first kind of languages that you get exposed to. All right, we can think of HTML as a way of making things look nice on the internet. And this is actually how I kind of I use HTML to build this this Canvas website in a way. Right, so I use HTML to kind of make a table of contents that you can kind of click on. Right, so these are all links that we can click on. Right, if I click on course description, it'll bring us right down to there. Right, that this is you can look at the source of this too. Right, like this is kind of off topic, but I want to expose people to what HTML is. Right, so if I load up the code for this, it does look a little complicated. Right, this is HTML code. Right, it's a way of representing formatted text. Right, and for me, the table of contents was somewhere. Let me table of contents. Let me You can actually right-click on websites and kind of see how this is represented. If you right-click it and then do inspect, it might bring up something down here. All right, so this is not Python, by the way. This is another language. Right? It's a formatting language. So in this case, it looks hard to read, but the goal of this next part will be to understand HTML. Right? It is not Python. We're going to be doing HTML within Python. Right? So folks might be wondering, oh, what is this? Right? I've said this so many times. It stands for hypertext markup language. It is not a programming language. It's just a way of formatting things to change the font. Maybe you're making tables. Maybe you're changing colors, right? Or maybe you're inserting links that are clickable. Right? It's not a programming language. So we're going to be representing HTML within Python. Right? So this should be interesting to maybe web designers or people who are trying to make pages, right? Make simple pages look nice. For example, let's say I were to go on the Cabrillo website, right? Cabrillo.edu. Right? It is possible to view the HTML representation of this website. Right? If you're on Google Chrome or Firefox, you can just right-click it and then look. I think it's inspect or view page source. Right? If you do the view page source, this is kind of hard to read. I'm going to do something else. I'm just going to inspect right here. Inspect is the same thing, but it'll narrow down where this is. All right, so I just inspected this element. Right, this element in HTML is represented over here. Right, so this is, imagine this line of code. Let me just zoom in a bit. Right, so this is like a line of code. It does look a little hard to read, but with F strings, it'll let us kind of modify HTML. All right, so imagine this as a whole right here. So I just highlighted something in this code is discover your path. Right? It's possible to edit this. Right? Imagine this as some variable, and I'm just going to edit it to hello space world. Right, and press enter, and we see that the Cabrillo website got modified a tiny bit. Right, so we're not actually modifying the website on the server side. This is only viewable on our side. So if we were to refresh this page, it's going to be gone. Right, so I just refreshed it. So yeah, you're not hacking a website. You're not changing it for everyone. You're just kind of playing around with HTML code. Right, and similarly, you can right-click here, right, and inspect. So I'm just going to inspect this element right here, students. Right, so students right here. This is, you can imagine this line of code, and students is maybe some hole. Right, I'm just going to say Bob, right, Bob, and then enter. So you see how Bob kind of got changed. I mean, the student got changed. Right, people kind of see what HTML is now. It's like a language that can help format websites. Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be pretty sick. Yeah, this next lesson will be inputting HTML to Python. We'll be using Python to render HTML. Right? Render means to display. Oh, no, we're not going to learn CSS in this lesson. For folks who are curious what CSS is, it's a way of kind of pairing up with HTML and making the themes. Right? You can think of CSS as theming. But no, we're going to stick with... Huh? Oh, yeah, both work. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you apply CSS to HTML, and then... Exactly. Yeah, but for this one, we're just going to keep it simple and focus on pure HTML. Okay. There's some documents here. HTML elements, these are elements, like pieces of a website. And so we're going to get exposed to several of these. Right, so I'm going to click on here, right? HTML elements, they typically start with this tag name, right? Tag name can be whatever element you're representing, and then it ends with a closing tag. Right, so you think of these as formatters, right? So if we were to put h1 and then end it off with another h1, this is like saying heading, right? Heading is another way of saying title, so it'll be big. And then P, paragraph, this will automatically indent things. Right, so we're going to get exposed to a few elements today and use F strings to make things look nice. So here, let's jump into it, right? Let's write some Python code that produces HTML. So make sure you run this very first cell. It will import a library that will allow us to render things. Right, so this is important. Run this first cell. Okay. I do want to reiterate that we're kind of learning two languages right now. So maybe try to differentiate it. We're going to be doing HTML strings, right, and using Python to render it. So yeah, kind of two languages. So I'm going to create a string here called like hello HTML world. Right? If we were to yeah, this is just a plain string, right? But when we enclose it in some tags, right? In this case, I'm going to enclose it with h1 and then /h1. Right, so make sure the forward slash is there, not a backslash. So on both sides, right? The opening tag and closing tag, right? The way HTML closes is with the forward slash. And then h1 just means a title, right? It just means big title, the first title. So I'm just going to store this in like my HTML. So this is just a string, right? It's actually an HTML string. So we can display that, right? With we have to convert it to something called an HTML object. So we take this string, right, HTML, and then convert it to an HTML object. Right? We haven't really talked about objects yet. Just think of it as a fancy variable. Right? So we're converting this string into an HTML object, and then we can display it, which will render it on this page, right? To display, and then hello HTML world. Okay, press play. Okay, and hopefully we see that it's like a big title. Right, so this is kind of like similar to my Canvas homepage. Right, in the Canvas homepage, you know, this is an H1, right? H1 meaning the first title, but then you can have sections within titles, right? Like, you know, section 1 and then section 1.1, section 1.2, section 1.3, right? You can have subsections, right? Like right here, I have a subsection called course description, and then another subsection here, another subsection, right? And then another major subsection. But those are represented with like H2, H3. So if I were to, you know, let me just represent this as a multi-line string. I'm kind of getting ahead of the lesson right now, but I just want to introduce some tags, right? In particular, the H tags. So let's convert this to a multi-line string. So I use triple quotes. Right? So H1, this is like saying big title, right? So big title, and then you can do subsections, right? So some subsections is with an H2, right? H2 /H2, and this is like a subsection, right? And then if I were to put two subsections underneath the title, it'd be the same thing, right? Subsection 1, subsection 2, and let me just press play, right? So we see how like there's a big title and there's two subsections that are slightly smaller, right? And you know, H3, you can probably assume, you can probably guess what that is, right? It's a subsection, right? Just a smaller one. So subsection, and then H3. Right, this is like, Yeah, it's like titles and sections. So yeah, let's go with that. Let me make this look easier to read. You actually don't need this right here, but I'm going to put it in anyways. These indents. This way we can see what's within what. Right, so big title has 2 subsections, and then each subsection has maybe more. Right, subsection 1, 2, and I'm just going to do the same over here. Right, once again, you don't really need these indents, but it'll kind of, it's more readable. Right, so we run this, it's the same thing, right? Big title, subsection 1, 2. People kind of see why I did the indent. Just lets us know what belongs in what. Okay, so this is kind of a head, but we're going to use an f string later, right, to fill in these holes. Right, so in the future we're going to put we're going to make this an f string, right? We're going to prefix it with an f, and then turn these into variables. Right, that's going to be later. You'll probably see this in the lab if you do a bit of read ahead. Okay, but let's move on, right? All we've covered right now are headings, right? Just a fancy way of saying titles. Let's see an application of f strings. So let's say we have 2 variables, right? Color and text. Right, so I'm just going to set 2 variables. One is green, and this is a plain text, is hello world. Okay, we're going to use these two variables to fill in some HTML strings. Okay. Okay, this might look a little tricky, but I'm going to build it from the ground up. Right, this third line is a little hard to read, so let's kind of build it up. Right, I'm not going to use the variables yet. Right, let me just create an HTML string. Right, like let me just say my HTML. I'm going to deviate from this example a tiny bit. I'm going to create an HTML string that has these tags, B, right, and /B. So I'm just going to put something in here, like I'm just going to put the text here, but this is an F string. All right, B stands for bold. This is a element of HTML that you can look at the documentation, right? So there's lots of tags we can use, right? If you click on this link over here, it'll bring you to this website, and you can kind of see all the different tags we can use. In particular, we're using bold. Let me see where that is. Let's see, HTML elements. It is kind of dense. Let's see, I think I gotta click on one of these subsections. For bold, yeah. Attributes, yeah, let me see. Oh yeah, okay, I think it is. Somewhere here. Let me control F this. Bold, nope, not here. Yeah, anyways, it's in one of these subsections. As you might see, HTML is very dense. There's lots of things we can do. Let me see formatting. Oh, here it is, perfect. It's in formatting. So the tag B stands for bold text, right? It's like in your Microsoft Word, and you're making things a little thicker, right? So that's what we're using right here, bold. Right, so here I made a HTML string, right, that interpolates text, and we can go ahead and print it out, right? Or not print it out, render it. And so we should probably convert this string into an HTML object. Right, so there we go, converted. And now we can go ahead and display it. Right, so I'll display it, which should render it. Okay, so there we go. It prints in bold. And once again, this is just a tag, right? If we take a look at the documentation, there's lots of things we can use. right? Like if we do an I, this should be italics, right? You don't have to change it, but just leave it bold for now. Right? I is italic. You can do U for underline. All right, same thing, but I'm going to leave it as bold for now. So we're using an F string to modify a text, right? And we're just displaying it nicely. Let's go ahead and make it green. This is going to be a little trickier. I actually don't expect folks to know how to do this, but basically we're going to use another tag called a span. Right? Span, this is a fancy way of saying formatting. Right? So let's go ahead and enclose these with a span tag. Right? So this is going to look a little tricky. In this example, it's kind of hard to read. Right? Everything is in one line. So let's make it into a multi-line string. All right, so I'm going to turn this into a multi-line string to make things look a little easier to read. All right, so there's a multi-line string. And this way we can see what belongs in what. So, okay, run it. It does the same exact thing. Yeah, it becomes a formatted string. When we do the F here, it interpolates the text variable. So that's why it's printing hello world. The reason why we're using multi-line string is to make this look a little more readable, because we're going to encapsulate this whole thing within a theme, right? In particular, a green theme. Right? So let's use something called a span tag. Right? So span, and then end it off with another, the tag, right? Span. And then you don't need these indents, but I'm going to put it in here anyways, just to make things look more readable. Right? So in HTML, the new lines don't matter. Everything can be on a single line, but in my opinion, this is a lot easier to read. So we have a span and a /span, right? If folks are curious what this is, it's just a fancy way of saying style, a fancy way of saying style. And you can see that in the documentation somewhere over here. Yeah, if you click on one of these, it will go into spans. But we're going to modify this opening tag to make it a certain color. Right, so I'm just going to say style is equal to this string, double quotes. Right, so a span, the things after it tell what style to use. Right, we're just going to keep it simple for now, just change the color. Right, we're going to say the color is something, and then semicolon. Right, I'm just going to hard code a red for now. I'm going to hard code a red, and then press play. And it should say hello world in red. And once again, don't worry too much about the syntax. You're going to be able to look back at it anyways. But yeah, this is just, it's the same as above here. Right? This is just harder to read because you can't see what's inside of what. Let's see. With an F string, we can do variable interpolation, meaning that we can use these curly braces to fill in the value of some variable. Right? In this case, color was already defined as green. So if we run this, it should be green now. So yeah, do people kind of see the use of F strings now? Right? A useful scenario is you have a predefined HTML template, right? And we can change the theme just by editing these two variables. Right? You don't really have to go into the HTML code. You can just change these variables, like I am Andrew. Right? Same thing. So we don't have to go in here and change it. Yeah, it's very modular. Okay. So, this is the same as above here, right? But it's just a little different style, right? You can have everything in one line. Don't do this. It's harder to read in my opinion. Right? You can have everything in one line, but then you can't. It's kind of hard to maintain because you can't see what belongs in what. You can't see the nesting. So this is easier to read. Whoops, I got an error right here. Name green is not defined. All right, I meant this to say a color, the value of the variable. Yeah, and once again, to make things look a little more easier to read, you don't have to do this, but you can put the bold tags right here. Right, then this is arguably easier to read because you can see there's multiple things. Right, like if I were to do another text right here, like let me just do some italics. Right, let me just do some italics. So /I, and then I'm just put like another text here, the same thing. And then run it. Right, see what it did. All right, now hello world is being printed twice. All right, one is a bold, and then the next is italics. Folks might be wondering, why is this on one line? Well, it's once again, the HTML, the formatting doesn't matter, right? You can put all of these on one line, and it'll be the same thing, right? So this actually reads, here, don't do this, but it actually reads like this right here. Right? It reads like, I'm just going to combine all of these in one line. Right, so boom. Right, see, this is the same thing. Right, hello world, right? It's pretty much reading like this right here. Right, so I just combined it again. Right, that's how I was reading it as. So the formatting doesn't matter. It's just for ease of readability. But if we want it to be on multiple lines, right, you're going to get exposed to something called a line break later. Right, like later down here, you'll see something called a line break, a BR tag. Right, I'm not sure what BR stands for, but you can think of it as like an enter key. Oh, BR stands for break. That's what it stands for. So it doesn't require a closing tag, but if we do a BR right there, it just says use a new line, right? Go to the next line. So we run this, and then it will just go to the next line. It's probably better to put this on this line right here. Right? This way it's a little more readable. Another line break there. Okay. So yeah, this is kind of a sneak peek into HTML. I think we're going to do the rest of this later on Wednesday, but I want folks to kind of get a sneak peek into it. All right, good old HTML. By the way, this is not Python, right? Everything, the only thing that's Python about this is the F string, right? But this stuff is another language, right? This is the stuff that we got exposed to earlier, like when we went on the Cabrillo website. Right? When we got to the Cabrillo website and did a inspected the source. Right? Like if I inspect the source and just right click it and then inspect, right, it brings up HTML code. Right? So the website is represented like this. Right? So let me highlight over some things right here. So in particular, this right here is a title. Right? It's the way it's represented is an H5. Right? If folks can't read this, pretty much on the bottom it says H5. Right? It's saying it's a Title 5 class. So hopefully people kind of see why I space things out in a certain way. This way you can see what elements belong where. Yeah, pretty cool stuff. Okay. Okay, let me see what else is there. Mhm. Mhm. Oh, the name of Python? Oh, let's see. I'm not sure why Python is called the Python. What does C++ stand for? Yeah. Yeah, good question. Hold up, that's a little off topic. Yeah, but if anything, C++ is like C but upgraded. That's yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I don't think Python is called Python because of the way strings are formatted. I'm not sure why they call it that. Yeah. Hmm. 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 Yeah, yeah. So these strings have nothing to do with the way Python is being named. But so, yeah, you did say something about li. Li is a list item that we'll cover later. So later on, we'll do something called lists, where we can represent kind of um, yeah, list items. So, yep. Yeah. OL means ordered list. UL means unordered list. We'll do that on Wednesday. But yeah, if but once again, I'm not sure why they call it Python. That's a good question. Okay, 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 cool. Let's see. I'm gonna look at the HTML lab. You don't have to look at it. I don't think we know how to do it yet. Let's see. Okay. Let's kind of summarize some stuff. I just realized that the next lab is kind of a review of uh, today. If folks want to get a head start on it, let's kind of summarize what we did. Right? We kind of touched on two lessons today. Right? The first one we touched was called uh, quotes and formatting. So that's right over here. Where is it? Quotes and formatting. Right? This is the first lesson we touched. Uh, Try to get this lab done before the next class. Right? This we got all the way down to part three. Part three asks us to repeat everything in part two, but with a format function. All right, so get this done because we're gonna have to do it again. Right? I just realized that our next lab on HTML right here. Where is it? Yeah, lab 9. Right, this is gonna ask us to do it again. It's kind of like a warm up. Right, so part one and part two. Right, this is like a prerequisite for the next class, right? Because we're gonna do part three next class, the HTML stuff. So yeah, to summarize it, get the rest of the lab 8 done right over here. Right, get the part three done, and then as a prerequisite for the HTML lab, I'll go to the next lab, right, lab '09, and try to get the first two parts done. Right, part one on f strings again and formatting function, and then part two. Right, so then we'll get into this stuff on Wednesday. Okay, so yeah, we're done for today. I hope folks found that interesting. But yeah, have a great Monday, everyone. Thank you for coming.